Good morning, everybody. Adele Kraft from Food Focus, and I'm so excited to welcome you to our first Food Safety Fundamentals. It gives me great pleasure today to officially welcome you. And like I said, my name is Adele Kraft, and I'm from Food Focus. And it's such an opportunity for me to have our first webinar for this year. And we are really looking forward to assist you guys in terms of any questions that you've got. Now, our topic today is cybersecurity for food safety. Are you prepared? What we like to do is we like to connect people to people and people's problems to solutions, but the solutions specifically to industry specialists. And today, it gives me great honor to introduce you to our moderator for the chat, as well as our speaker. And I would like for Jess to ask her to put on, thank you, Jess, and Carl, if you can please put on your camera as well as your mic. I will appreciate that. There we go. Thank you so much, guys. I'm going to switch my camera off so that we can focus on the two most important people. So Jess is one of our editorial assistants with Food and Beverage Reporter, and Jess is pursuing her master's degree in food safety and microbiology at Stellenbosch University in South Africa under the supervision of Professor Pieter Gous and Professor Gunnar Ziggy. She is enthusiastic and diligent and involved individual who thrives on challenges and is always willing to learn. And that I've definitely seen, and we're so honored to have her as part of the team. Her approach is mature and responsible in dealing with any assignments or issues that comes her way, while her ease in collaborating with others to accomplish specific goals on the excellence set on her part, definitely high excellence. Her ultimate goal is to make a positive contribution to the industry. I do apologize about that, to the industry, and also to change the lives of people through food safety. Thus, it is clear that her passion for the food sector is what motivates her to develop practical solutions to the challenges that modern culture faces. And I do feel today's topic, Jess, you're going to add a lot of value. So thank you for that. Then I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Carl Kroch. He is an information security professional who has worked for over 20 years in the financial insurance services sector, as well as the telecommunications industry, both national and international. Carl has both a technical and management background with extensive experience in security assurance, risk management, governance, and forensics, IT security frameworks, and methodologies, and threat vulnerability management. He is currently based in France, where he worked on a multi-year security transformation and cultural change project for one of the world's leading global insurance companies. Carl, Jess, thank you so much for tackling this very interesting topic. We do see that within the food and beverage industry, there's a lot of change in terms of automation and cyber attacks and cyber security, and I hope you guys are going to assist and providing information to our attendees on this. Like I've mentioned, guys, please jot your questions down into the chat bar, and we will provide opportunity afterwards and try to answer all your questions. And with that, over to you two. Thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. Okay, so it's no surprise that the rise of cyber-related incidences are becoming alarming, and that businesses of all sizes need to become aware of the risks that it poses. Computers, programs, online data has opened a whole new world, which has the potential to make our lives, tasks, and businesses much easier. However, after talking to some auditors and food safety coaches in South Africa, I've realized that our industry may be a little behind on this topic. And if they consist of people like myself, This topic is extremely overwhelming and can come across as extremely complex and intimidating. So I hope that Carl and I will be able to break down some of those walls to help you tackle this topic with some more confidence. So Carl, the first question would be, as we introduce the theme of cybersecurity, could you please explain what a cyber attack is and why we need cybersecurity in our homes and in our businesses?
Okay, morning, Jess. Thank you so much for the question. First of all, just thank you for allowing me on this platform so that I can share some of my views and insights and hopefully raise awareness amongst SMEs for the need for cybersecurity. So to your question, what is a cyber attack? I think depending on who you speak to, you're going to get a lot of different definitions, but in essence, it is a criminal or a threat actor or a hacker, whatever you want to call them, that are trying to gain unauthorized access to your environment, or they're trying to steal data from your environment, or the third one is they're trying to cause malicious damage to your infrastructure. So these three pillars can be expanded into various attack vectors, but when you basically roll them out, you'd be able to get through these three pillars.
Yeah. So that would then bring me to my second question. Cyber attacks happen more often than what we actually think, and that was evident from the article you wrote for Food Focus. How can a small business that's not running their production mainly through online programs or technological systems manage their cybersecurity? Would they need to implement any sort of cybersecurity measures in their business?
Well, I think perhaps if we can just quote a couple of statistics just to put this into perspective. Now, a recent Interpol report showed that in 2016, cyber attacks cost the South African economy around $573 million, okay? Of which half of the attacks were aimed at SMEs. So it's no longer just the big corporates and the financial institutions and the big insurers that are being targeted. Everybody has become a target. If you compare that with a stat where companies normally take around, on average, about 280 days to identify an attacker on the network, and then a further 80 days to recover from that attack. So from when the attack happens to when the company can say, well, they've basically recovered, you're looking at about a year of disruption on your network. If we look at the threat actors that we need to protect against, we are all aware of the Colonial pipeline hack that happened last year in the US that disrupted fuel supplies. The threat actors behind that hack, they're called DarkSide, the threat group, and an analysis of their Bitcoin wallet showed that they made around $90 million of profit or Bitcoin ransom payments over a period of 9 months. So it's an extremely lucrative trade. And the last thing I want to mention is these hacker groups are providing a service to other hackers. So they've got things like ransomware as a service or malware as a service, which is a cloud-based platform where they allow other criminals to subscribe to their platforms. They will give them access to the phishing campaigns. They will give them access to the malware that they need to install in these companies. They will give them access to their payment platforms. So all you need to do is identify a target, and these guys will give you all the tools that you need in order to launch a successful attack. And all they want is a cut of the profit that's made at the end of the day. So you're looking at a threat landscape that is continuously evolving based on our adoption of technology, the digital transformation that happened as part of COVID. A lot of companies moved to online working, where cybersecurity wasn't necessarily the main goal in mind. it was how to facilitate access to my staff while they work from home without thinking too much about security. Remember, the threat actors that we're talking about here, these guys have been working remotely for ages. That is their business plan. They've got their communication infrastructure set up. They know exactly what tools they need to use and how to use these tools. They are collaborating in the background very effectively. And we are playing catch up because a lot of the business were forced into this environment. So I think what we're seeing is there's money to be made. What we're seeing is South Africa is no longer excluded. South African businesses are also a target. We're seeing that businesses of all shapes and sizes are being targeted, and we know that there's money to be made. So that is the reason why we need to start focusing on cybersecurity across all business environments in South Africa to ensure that, well, not only protect our economy, but make sure that all of our businesses, large and small, do have the resiliency built up to be sustainable during the course of a cyber attack.
Okay. So my next question kind of links into this. Firstly, those facts are a bit terrifying, and it's quite scary to realize that, you know, your cyber crimes are all interlinked in one way or another. It gives the degrees of separation a whole new meaning. In the installing and updating and then just simply having to work with a cyber setup is new for quite a lot of people who have now had to learn to work remotely in the last 2 years. And it can be quite costly and complex if you're not experienced to it. So at what stage would an individual who has a small business, or even just an individual at home, need to consider the implementation of a cybersecurity program in its formal manner?
Yeah, well, based on what I'm seeing in my area of expertise, I think the answer would be yes today. I don't think a business can survive if they do not have a cyber program in place. And I'm not talking about the be-all and end-all, a Ferrari type of design. I'm talking about looking at the basics. Okay? Cybersecurity has become instrumental in the way that we do business, even if we don't acknowledge it. I think technology has permeated the business environment to such an extent that it can no longer be ignored. I had an interesting conversation with somebody a week or two back, small company, employed 2 people, like a home industry, and they told me, well, they don't really use technology, you know, so why should they be concerned? But you know, if you start unpacking that, first of all, if you look at it from a regulatory perspective, we all know that POPI came into effect last year, and it's got serious implications in terms of how you're managing or protecting personal identifiable information, ID numbers, physical addresses, email addresses, bank details, etc. So if you're a small business and you're employing at least one person, you do have their electronic information or personal information stored somewhere on an electronic device. And according to POPI, you need to put controls in place to safeguard that information. So the regulatory risk is huge in terms of protecting of information. If we're looking at the type of technology that's being used in smaller companies, everybody uses email. So that makes you susceptible to quite a large number of attacks. A lot of people are using online communication, similar to the platform that we're currently using to communicate. A lot of people are using WhatsApp, they're using mobile devices in order to communicate and to connect to the work environment. Your financials are being run through a program where you've got a third party that supplies you with the software that you use. A lot of companies are using online storage. If you think about the Dropboxes of the world, for instance, where information is stored in the cloud. So if you're a small company and you believe that you don't use technology, I think it's important to step back and understand exactly what that statement means. There are so many instances where you are relying on technology in order to conduct your business. And there are also so many instances where you are engaging with vendors and you're engaging with third parties and you're engaging with clients through various platforms. So technology has become integrated into your business. And I don't think you've got the luxury anymore where you can ignore cybersecurity, similar to what we're doing with physical security, similar to what we're doing in terms of ensuring against theft and loss. Cybersecurity is a key enabler to your business that needs to be addressed. And I think it starts with creating that awareness at your C levels, creating that awareness at your director and senior management levels so that they become aware of the threats and the risks, so that they can start looking at it and at least start managing the risks effectively.
So that leads to my next question. Seeing as we should already be knee-deep in the cybersecurity sector, or at least programs and measures, could you please give some direction as to what we, in specifically small businesses or even individuals, should be looking at in terms of a cybersecurity program?
Well, you know, if we look at first of all, if we take the Interpol report that was released, they documented the set of attacks that are prevalent in the South African environment. They are talking about online scams, you know, where people are trying to get information from you, either personal or financial. They're looking at extortion type of attacks where there's blackmail involved when they get access to your information. There's the ever-present ransomware that's out there where companies compromise your environment and try to encrypt your data. There's also the business email compromise component where they get access to your email and misrepresent themselves to your staff in order to get them to you know, either transfer money to a third party or perform access that is detrimental to the organization. So I think, first of all, that there are a lot of methodologies out there that you can implement. But it is going to be costly. It is going to be time consuming. You are going to need resources. You are going to need expertise, but you don't need to go to that level. I think for the smaller companies, if you start off with a basic risk assessment, cyber risk assessment, have a look. First of all, identify what all your assets are. Where do you keep your data? Where do you store your data? How do you store your data? What applications do you use to manage and process your data? And what hardware do you have in the company? I'm talking about cell phones, notebooks, desktops, potential servers, printers. Have an asset register so that you at least have a view on what it is that you're protecting. Once you have that view defined, start looking at what are the risks associated with these devices. What are the types of attacks that can happen? And I mean, if you use the internet as a reference, sorry, you will find the high-level attacks that you should be safeguarding your company. You know, you don't need to be an IT specialist or a security specialist to define it to the level where you're protecting against nation-state attacks, but you can still protect your company against the basic attacks that's prevalent on the internet. So internet search will give you a good indication what it is that you should be looking at. If you take those type of attacks, you compare that to your asset register and understand, will that have an impact on me, this type of attack? The next step is to look at what controls you have in place to safeguard you against this type of attack. Again, it can be extremely technical, and you are going to get a lot of acronyms that might seem weird and wonderful. But if you refine your search on the internet, it should at least give you the high-level key controls that you should be looking at. We take the Windows operating system. There are a myriad of attacks that can be launched against the operating system. But if you start looking at what controls you can put in place, sometimes a simple patch management program where you update your operating system with the software patches that are released from Microsoft on a regular basis, that might be a sufficient control to ensure that your computer, or that you've addressed the vulnerabilities on your operating system. So leverage of what you can find on the internet, document that. I mean, you don't need to document everything. Document the ones that you feel relevant based on the logic that you apply. Have a look at what controls are in place to safeguard you. See what the gaps are between what the internet suggests or what your third parties or your suppliers suggest, what you have, and put a plan in place how to address that, to get that in place. If you look at your risk assessment, you can rate your risks. If you look at something like impact and likelihood. So what's the likelihood of an attack occurring? That can be once a year or twice a year. What is going to be the impact? If you lose your systems for a day, for a month, what is the financial impact? And between those two factors, you can come up with a simple rating system, high, medium, and low, and at least know where you should be focusing your attention on, where you should be focusing your resources on, and where you should be throwing money at the problem in order to get that resolved. So it's all about knowing what you have, what type of attacks you're being exposed to, what controls you've got, what you still need, and how you're managing that on a daily basis. So that would be a good starting point instead of implementing this massive vulnerability management framework or risk management framework. At least know what your risks are. I think that would be a good starting point.
Okay. So in essence, our food safety management systems would be tailored to each company, and then our cybersecurity systems would also be tailored in a similar manner. However, most of us at least have a bit of knowledge setting up elements of food safety, and often this helps us to mitigate certain expenses. Does this mean that cybersecurity measures will cost us an arm and a leg? And if so, what measures would you say are usually top priority in most smaller companies?
Okay, so in terms of cybersecurity costing money, you must understand that cybersecurity does not give you a direct return on investment. You're not going to have a situation where you spend 1,000 Rand and you can expect 1,300 Rand worth of return back. It is similar to the money that you're investing in your physical security program. You don't have a direct return on investment, how much you're going to make if you install CCTV cameras around your factory or your premises. It's also similar to insurance. There's no return on investment in insurance. You're basically insuring against the risk. And that is exactly what a cybersecurity program is. You basically ensuring that your business can continue in the event of a serious attack by implementing certain controls and measures to limit the impact a cyber attack will have on your environment. So is it going to cost money? Yes. If we talk about the bigger companies, the big international companies, they're spending between 8 and 15% of their turnover on cybersecurity, which is a huge amount. If we're looking at SMEs, that number drops down to around between 0.2 and 0.9% of their turnover on cybersecurity. Now, for a lot of companies, that's a lot of money that they just don't have. So where do you start? I mean, like we just spoke about now, there are things you can do from a governance perspective to at least have something in place. Like I mentioned, the risk assessment with your risk and threats and what controls you have. One thing that we shouldn't forget here, Jess, is Poppy is going to have a huge impact in the way that we do business. If we look at the fines, and I mean, I don't want to go into this fear, uncertainty, and doubt road, but Poppy limited their fines to 10 million rand. So that's a maximum that you can be fined if you're leaking personal identifiable information. Okay, and obviously they'll apply the fine on a sliding scale based on the circumstances and what controls the company have in place, etc. We shouldn't forget that there's also a component that speaks to jail time. So not only are you going to be fined a tremendous amount of money, but there is a potential that you can end up in jail. So Poppy is going to have a huge impact in terms of how we do our business. So I don't think companies have a choice. Sorry. I don't think they have a choice anymore. Based on the stats that we're seeing, the increase in cyber attacks internationally, it is become almost a systemic event that you have to consider when you're managing cybersecurity in your environment. So from a cost perspective, perhaps it's something, a way to propose that to executive management and C-suite is you investing in your brand. There is protection of the brand name. You know, if you undermine the trust that people have in your brand, that you are not able to look after your own environment or their data when they give it to you, they will just move over to somebody else. They call it the long tail of a cyber attack. You know, initially you respond to the attack, then you recover, but the long tail is the loss of customer confidence, the clients that you've lost, clients that you have to get back. And as we saw in the initial stats, it takes about a year to recover. A year is a very long time, especially for a smaller company. So you need to balance that. Are you willing to take the risk of being down, having your systems attacked and not being available? To what extent can you operate without that in terms of your disaster recovery and business continuity plan? Or do you need to do at least something that you can get the main risks addressed? Interestingly enough, if we look at ransomware, the majority of these massive ransomware attacks that happened over the past years, you don't see attackers developing new attacks, exploiting new vulnerabilities. These guys are exploiting existing vulnerabilities that should have been patched as part of a patch management process, where you just apply security patches that are released by your vendors that look after your operating system and your application. So for a lot of these companies, if they apply patches, that attack wouldn't have been successful. If they did user awareness on their staff, how to spot phishing attacks, these attacks wouldn't have happened. So in a lot of cases, if you do the basics and you do the basics well, there's a good chance that you will be protected against some of these attacks. And at least, remember, an attacker follows the path of least resistance. They try and attack company A, and their basic attack does not work. They will just move over to company B and company C until they're successful and take it from there. So there's a lot that we can do that will not cost a lot of money, that we can at least have a basic level of protection for our companies.
Yeah. So most people watching this, I'm sure, at least understand the way which compliance is made in terms of food safety, and that when we set up food safety programs, standards help a lot to understand what is expected and in order to just help to ensure compliance. So from my chats with you prior when I first met you, I understand that cybersecurity programs work in a similar manner and that you get requirements and standards such as ISO 27001. However, when it comes to demonstrating compliance with cybersecurity controls, how is this done from an industry perspective?
So compliance is an interesting concept. So it's one thing to have a risk assessment and have controls designed from a control efficiency perspective. You can design the most amazing controls, and on paper they will look very good and they will address the risk. But as soon as you implement these controls in a production environment where you need to start communicating with other systems, that's where people start tweaking these controls in order to not to cause issues on an operational side, and that can undermine the effectiveness of the control. So you need to look at operational effectiveness of the controls. How to do that? I point you back to the risk assessment that was done again. If you've done the risk assessment and you've identified the controls that need to address your risk, you need to focus on those key controls and do some form of assurance to prove that the controls are working as originally intended. So what does that mean? In a lot of cases, you're looking at manual type work. If let's take, for example, identity and access management. You need to give people the least privileges to do their work. You know, if somebody only needs read access to data, don't give them access to modify or change the data. So how do you check that? You can do on a quarterly or a 6-monthly basis. Just draw a list of all your company data assets, where the data is stored, and just make sure that the people have got appropriate access. You can do it on a sample base. Just do 1 or 2 checks and document it. Keep it for safekeeping in case something happens, that you can prove to the regulator or third party that you are doing these type of reviews. Not everything is manual. Some of the things that you can look at are system level controls. If we take the example of patch management and operating systems, all you need to do is check that the setting is enabled on the operating system, that it will automatically go out, look for updates and apply them when they are downloaded. So you need to go back to your controls that you've identified in your risk assessment, identify how you're going to test them, how you're going to make sure that they are working as intended, document that, and then execute on that. So it is going to involve some manual work, but you can leverage of some of your suppliers that are already doing a lot of work to make sure that the product that they're pushing out is secure. They're already doing a lot of testing. So you can contact your suppliers, your software suppliers, and your hardware suppliers, and document the controls that they've already put in place to make sure that their product is secure. And you can leverage of that from your company's perspective. But the important thing is you have to have visibility. Security through obscurity does not work. The fact that you don't know doesn't mean that somebody else doesn't know. You know, so you need to be aware of what you've got, what the risks are, what your controls are, and what you're doing to make sure that the controls are working effectively.
Cool. Carl, there's actually a question that has been posted that I think links to this quite nicely. And so basically what's asked is, how does one guarantee the effectiveness of the cybersecurity system? So I think,
look, it's a governance process, right? It's not just making sure that there is a control in place. You need to make sure that the control speaks to the risk, and you need to make sure that the risk speaks to the business objective, and you need to ensure that the business objective speaks to the strategy. So how to ensure that the control is effective? Going back to our risk assessment, if you've done the risk assessment looking at all the risks that your company faces in terms of the threats and the vulnerabilities, you would have identified your key controls, the controls that you absolutely rely on to make sure that your company stays secure. Once you've identified those key controls, a simple internet search will give you an indication how you can test that control for effectiveness. And that is something that you have to implement. you have to make somebody, first of all, it's important that your risks are assigned to individual people. If you just have a risk register that's sitting on the side, nobody's going to look at it. It's just going to be a document that serves as a tick box. So you assign the risk to specific people, make them accountable so that they go out and do the research and understand what it is that I need to test. I mean, in some cases, if it's extremely technical, you can get external parties in to come help you with your assurance process. But normally, based on research that you do yourself on the internet, you'd be able to find ways of testing that control to make sure that it works. If we look at accounting packages, segregation of duty as an example, the person that creates the invoice shouldn't be the person that authorized the payment of the invoice. That is something simple that can be tested. You can basically run through the process, create an invoice on a user account and see if you can approve it afterwards. That is a test. So if you're talking about the effectiveness, how to prove effectiveness of these controls, it all relates back to the whatever framework you've put in to make sure that you are speaking to your key controls. So I wish I could tell you there's an easy way, a silver bullet to do this. Unfortunately, it's not. But I think through communication, internal to the company, communication with executive management, communication with your vendors that supplied the equipment or the software to you, you'd be able to understand what it is that you can do to make sure that the controls are operating effectively.
I wish we could all have a silver bullet to the issues in business. So, Carl, you're a computer security specialist. You've pretty much got as much experience as what I've been alive, which is a lot. So, throughout your career, have you noticed any cybersecurity concerns that seem to be more prominent with food companies? And would food companies need any specialized measures to address these kind of concerns? Sorry.
Yeah, so interesting what we're seeing at the moment is you don't have a lot of differentiation between the type of companies and the type of attacks. So if you take ransomware as an example, we've got individuals being targeted by ransomware. You've got food companies being targeted. You've got manufacturing companies. You've got banks. You've got insurers. So as these criminals identify attack vectors that are extremely lucrative from their perspective, because remember, these guys are running a business as well. They need return on investment. I point you back to DarkSide that made $90 million in 9 months. That's an amazing amount of profit. So a lot of these attacks are not specific against industry, but you will find they're more general in nature. Now, if I can use an example, if we talk about ransomware attacks, in order for the attack to succeed, your attacker needs to get access to your network. And what we're seeing at the moment, that attack happens through phishing attacks, where your employees are sent email that are very believable. In the beginning, these things had spelling errors, and you could quickly identify that it's a phishing email. But these days, these things are very specialized. I mean, if I look at your Facebook profile, Jason, I'd be able to see what your interests are, what you're doing on a daily basis. And if I send you a specially crafted email with references to some of the information that you've got on your Facebook page or social media, the chances of enticing you to click on a malicious link on an email is huge. I mean, I take my wife in their business. They're consistently finding these emails saying, this invoice was overpaid, or this invoice needs to be paid. Click on this link to view the invoice, or open this document. And all of these, the links point to websites with malicious content. The attachments that she receives have got malware embedded in the PDF documents that as soon as you open it, it will execute on your local machine. So the attacks, although not industry specific, in order for the attack to succeed, they need to trick you into clicking on a link or to opening a malicious attachment. It's not always a situation where they compromise your web service through a vulnerability. The weakest link here, similar to what we're seeing with ASIP, incidentally, is the human factor. If you can trick a human to open something or install something, you've effectively got access into the company's environment. So specific to the food sector, like I said, if you look at the Interpol report with the default or the attacks that they've identified that are happening, you can basically take that and superimpose that on each and every sector in South Africa, and that will be relevant. One thing that I would like to point out is the use of operational technology. You know, the manufacturing systems that a lot of the small and medium enterprises are using in their environments. We are starting to connect these operational technology equipment, the manufacturing equipment, to our IT networks. They were never supposed to be connected to our IT networks. So we're exposing this equipment unwittingly to the internet, and they were never designed to be secure. So I think in the next year or so, we're going to see a significant increase on attacks on the OT type of environment, manufacturing equipment that's deployed in SMEs. But I think if you focus on the mainstream attacks and at least ensure that your company is protected from that perspective, I think you would have made a major leap in terms of increasing your company's security maturity.
Cool. So I've got two more questions before we'll open it to the floor. Data storage has been making a massive shift towards being on the cloud. Are there any specific measures to ensure that our data is stored safely on the cloud? And is it safe for me or other employees to access these documents from our tablets or phones and to send them, to example, to auditors or managers in the company? If so, how do I do so securely?
Okay, so first of all, cloud storage or cloud services have been sold as a very secure solution for your business. And make no mistake, it can be extremely secure. But in a lot of cases, you as the client have to configure that environment to make sure that it is secure. I can have the most secure cloud environment in the world, but if I allow all of my staff write or modify access to my data, I'm undermining the identity and access management principle of least privilege. If you only need read access to the data, why should I be giving you access to modify the data, download the data, change the data? So cloud storage can be secure, but you as the owner need to go back and actually have a look at the solution that you're using and see to what extent you can leverage off the existing controls that they've got. Are they doing backups of your data? To what extent do they protect your data against unauthorized access by third parties that does not originate from within your network? So those controls need to be documented so that you can have a view on how secure your information is. You know, something interesting. So let's take ransomware as an example, where a threat actor compromises your environment and encrypts your data. If you are connected to a, and I don't want to hammer Dropbox, but let's use Mega as an instance, also an online cloud storage solution. They work on a replication principle. So whatever you store on your local machine in a specific folder, that's replicated to the cloud. If that local folder on your machine is encrypted through malware, through a compromise, that same data is going to be replicated in the cloud. So it doesn't mean that you effectively just pushing this encrypted data into the cloud. So there are certain controls that will not safeguard you. Remember, the cloud is there to ensure that you've got access to your information from everywhere, from any device, that you're no longer tied to a specific technology. But it's not going to it's going to address your potential availability concerns, but it's not necessarily going to address confidentiality and integrity in terms of your approach. So you need to be aware what it actually means to store data in the cloud. Interestingly, in terms of POPI, and that's something that we still need to look at, but POPI states that you need to store information in the geographical boundaries in which the data was collected. And if you want to process that outside the geographical boundaries, you need to let the data owner know that that's going to happen. So the question for me, and I haven't really, I've seen opinions, but nothing specific, is if I store data in Dropbox or Mega, that data center can reside in Australia, that data center can be in Europe, somewhere in the States. So in theory, I'm moving data out of the geographical boundaries of South Africa, which in essence can put me at odds with POPI and the POPI requirements. So that's something that we still need to look at. I don't think, I certainly haven't seen a lot of clear guidance in terms of how that is supposed to happen. And then, lastly, to your question around how do you share information securely? So if we take the example of an auditor that's coming in to do an FSSC 22,000 audit, or a HACCP audit, or a compliance audit for one of the big distributors, you need to understand what type of access you're going to give to that auditor. Surely that auditor wouldn't need to modify data or change data. Does that auditor only need read access to your data? Do they need to download their data or your data onto their machines, or can they just work in an online environment? If that auditor is downloading data, your data, to the local machines, you still remain accountable. You can't turn around and say, okay, but remember the auditor took it and their machine, that's the thing that was compromised. You remain ultimately accountable. You can't shift that accountability to somebody else. Interestingly, if you take the recent hack that happened, Pick n Pay, where their information was compromised by a courier company, Dawnwing. So the Dawnwing systems were compromised and attackers got hold of personal information, street addresses, telephone numbers. So at this point in time, we were told, there's no ID numbers and no bank details. But I mean, if you weren't aware that you were hacked, how do you know what data was stolen in the first instance? But I mean, that's just a question on the side. But still, Pick n Pay used a fulfillment partner to deliver groceries on their behalf. This company was compromised, but the data belongs to Pick n Pay, and Pick n Pay will ultimately be held accountable. It's going to be interesting to see how the regulator deals with this, because it is personal identifiable information that was leaked. So how will they, the fine that they impose or the corrective action that they impose, is it just going to be on Pick n Pay? Is it going to be on Dawnwing? We need to ask ourselves what controls were in place to manage the security around the data that was shared with Dawnwing. A lot of times you can have contractual agreement, those type of things in place in case something goes wrong. But somebody needs to look at it from a practical perspective. When that information is shared, what with your third party, your downstream supplier, what controls do they have in place to protect your information? So when you're talking about online storage, there are all these questions you need to ask yourself. How can I be held liable? And what controls do I need to put in place to make sure that my data is protected? It's very interesting, it's very complex. there's, like I said, there are no easy answers to any of these things, but I think as long as we start talking about it,
Yeah.
creating awareness, we can start looking at potential mitigating controls or mitigating conversations so that we can protect our companies and our data better.
Coolness. Carl, I do not see any other questions in the question bar yet. So I've got one more short one, and then I will close off if that's okay with you.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so the last question quickly is, so if you're in my generation, you're expected to remember lots of passwords, and it's a mission when you forget your passwords. You're also expected to remember the passwords and usernames of your company, parents, grandparents, etc. So with all the different passwords that we now have, is it recommended to use a password manager? So.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, people of my generation have to remember even more passwords. I understand that. But yeah, so look, I'm a big supporter of password managers. What we're seeing, if let's say passwords, for instance, if you are using a dictionary-based password, any language, if you are using a password that you find in a dictionary, that password will be cracked in under a second. It's a fraction of a second in order for that password to be cracked, because it's literally just a comparison between the password and the encrypted value. It becomes a bit technical, but if it's a known word, less than a second. We're talking about the average desktop machine that you've got these days, average notebook with the average graphics card. They can then guess around 200 million unique passwords every second. Okay, so the processing power for just the average machines are immense, huge. So that means, if you've got a unique 6-digit PIN or password, it will, you can probably crack that within about 7 hours, 8 hours. So you need complex passwords in order to get by. But let's face it, if I have a 10, 13-digit password, ZXYQBW exclamation mark with a $sign, I'm never going to remember that unless I write it down on a piece of paper underneath my keyboard. That defeats the purpose. So that's why a lot of people choose simple passwords, because they need to remember all of them. And remember, the guidance is you have to have a unique password for every system you use. So if you use a password manager, you can have complex passwords. What the password managers do, it's a piece of software that you basically put your passwords, your usernames and your passwords in, and that will manage it on your behalf. So you can have complex passwords and then also use that as a way and means to change your passwords in a central place without having to go through change passwords, trying to remember what password you did where. What is important to note, if you're using a password manager to manage all these complex passwords, you can't have a dictionary word or a stupid password to look after your password manager. So you need to start looking at things like multi-factor authentication. What multi-factor authentication means is, first of all, it's something that you know, which is your password. It is something that you have. Normally these key fobs with numbers that keep on changing, or even the simple out-of-band OTP that's being sent via SMS to your cell phone. And thirdly, something you are, which is a fingerprint or a face scan. So the industry basically recommends that you employ at least 2 of the 3 to make sure that it is secure. So password managers, by all means, use them, because you can use very complex passwords that will ultimately result in your environment being protected better.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Carl. I wanted to say, I think my top 3 takeaways were to get security training as soon as possible and set up in your work environment. That to ensure that your cyber risks are defined and that you have appropriate plans in place, and that your employees are aware, have an awareness program in place to empower them with the relevant information on what they should look for and what to do about it. So like with food safety, cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility, and that everyone needs to take ownership to help protect the company. Adele, I'm not sure if you'd like to do a close off.
Absolutely. Jess, Carl, thank you so much. It's so interesting to listen to people that know what they're talking about and then understanding how little you actually know. So what we've done is we've set up a PDF document that we will be sending through to you with all the buzzwords and the different type of things that was mentioned by Carl, and with the guidance of Jess, we've put this document together, and we will definitely be sending this to you guys, and we also will have it as a download on our website. Carl, Jess, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for making this topic interesting. And like I said, our main goal is to try to focus and talk about topics that you guys struggle with. I know, being the person in control of a management system, there's a lot of challenges that you guys sit with, and there's many a times questions that you guys have, and you just like want to speak to someone and ask someone something about it, and that's why we are there. So please, guys, make sure that you go to our website at www.foodfocus.co.za. Subscribe to our newsletter. You are also welcome to send me an email, Adele at foodriskforum.co.za. And if there's questions and topics that you guys would like us to talk about and get professionals to assist and guide you and in getting answers, don't let it be a lonely environment where you sit and where you've got all these questions in terms of your food safety management systems. Make us part of it, and let's see in which way we can assist and help you. And we would like to wish you an awesome 2022, and understanding that Food Risk Forum, Food Focus is there to assist and help you. Have a lovely day. Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, audience.
Thank you very much.